Hey everybody, and welcome to another edition of Chat and Games, your weekly gaming show. I'm your host for the evening, afternoon, morning, whenever it is that you're listening to this, Melvin Rodriguez, and I'm joined by, as always, the sexy boys in the business, Mr. Matthew Howard. How you doing, Matt?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great, Matt. We have a lot of things to talk about today. Lots of questions regarding the current state of the industry. Lots of news that dropped today.
Yep.
If you didn't know, last week we actually live stream our reactions to the Nintendo Direct, so we're gonna be covering that towards the later half of the show. But to begin with, we got a few PlayStation news that dropped by. By the time we're recording this, there's a state of play happening the same week, but it's happening the following day. What we're talking about is all the news that came before the state of play happened, and one of those news is that PlayStation is going to bring over more of its IP titles to the PC, and that had positive and negative reactions. Mostly the negative reactions came from the people that are the console warriors. But I want you to get your thoughts on it, Matt. The first thing that comes to your mind? PlayStation titles coming to PC. Good, bad? What are your thoughts?
Nice.
Nice?
Yeah.
Why is it nice?
The more platforms the title is on, the more people can play it. And yeah, it's simple as that. As well as I think it's better just for archival purposes, putting games on PC.
Mm-hmm.
Because PC libraries are better about carrying over like throughout the years, whereas consoles, some games release on some console and then don't show up again for years and years and years, and now they're only playable on that old console. And yeah, it's not great for archival, which I think is important in this industry. I think it's important to be able to go back, play games that you might have missed, or games that in a lot of cases maybe at this point came out before you were born. There's a lot of, the industry's old enough now that there's a lot of people who are into it who weren't around when it started.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
I
there's value.
I really enjoy that accessibility point that you're bringing.
Yeah.
Because first of all, I didn't think about that, but one of the discussion topics that is always brought up is when Nintendo comes in and really re-releases a version of the same game and it charges $60. If it was on PC or something like this, you could literally have accessibility to the previous title, even if you don't want the enhanced version, whatever bells and whistles it has to make it a little bit prettier or anything, you can still access the old version. So I like that aspect of it.
Yeah, Nintendo would even have like their legacy titles that you could buy on newer systems not carry over to other systems. Like let's just take Super Metroid. Say you bought Super Metroid back on the Super NES, and then you bought it again on the Wii, and then again on the Wii U, and it just they're not great about that. But I think they're finally at a point where purchases are now tied to accounts, at least for them. So hopefully with the Switch 2 or whatever, stuff will carry over a bit better. But we'll see.
Yeah, hopefully. At the very least, I am happy on the Nintendo front before we get there. Well, at this last point before we get too off track, is that some of the accessibility is coming back, because with the Wii and the way that those controllers worked, it doesn't necessarily map one-to-one with other platforms out there. But at the very least, some of those games are now being converted into like normal controls. Like one example was Skyward Sword that happened on the Direct. You can at least now play that with a controller without having to do all the motion stuff, even though they kind of seemed like that was going to be the one thing that you were going to be doing.
Right.
One question that I got for you, Matt. Do you think that Sony loses anything for placing their games on the PC platform?
Not to any great extent. I believe that exclusives do carry like some of the legwork in selling consoles. You do see, like, in some cases when a major release comes out, suddenly sales of that console shoot up, and obviously that's good for the publisher. But I think that in most cases, people who want a console are going to get a console regardless,
Okay.
and they're also getting extra sales from people playing it on PC who wouldn't own a console otherwise. So I do think it's I obviously am not close enough to the industry and the specific numbers to know whether or not it's a net positive or negative for them, but I
Yeah.
do want to say like Xbox has been doing this for a while, so the fact that Sony has now decided to also do it makes me want to lean towards saying this is probably a net positive for them. Like they're not idiots. They're not doing this for no reason.
Yeah. I mean, and it's not a, this news comes of them saying we're gonna do more. They already released one of their main IP titles out there, like
Yeah.
Horizon Zero Dawn is already on PC. They already experimented with all of this, as you can see this from the trailer. If you're watching this on YouTube, by the way, which you can do by just searching chat and games on the YouTube platform. Um, it's just that they're gonna continually doing this more and more as they go along. I definitely think though that there is some aspect that is lost. So obviously one of the biggest push that you have for people to buy your box, your platform is okay, well, these are the games that you can only experience here. So come buy this platform so you can play those games. Otherwise you're not going to be able to play them. And I think for PlayStation that was a big push, especially building up these high caliber studios which are putting up very like they're obviously putting up a lot of money to make these games, these high quality games, and that's one of the reasons why Jim Ryan, the one who put up the statement, said that the quality, the cost of making these games is just getting bigger and bigger as the caliber of the IP grows bigger. That wording is a bit weird, but that's that's sort of more or less what he was saying. So in a way, you lose a little bit of a selling power towards your console. And I think then the main factor that is going to happen, or the big shift, is you're going to have to differentiate yourself in the hardware specs.
Yeah.
Like if you are really really pushing for your console, it's like, okay, what is the PlayStation 5 so much better than buying a PC? Is it more convenient? What is the convenient factor? Like why would I buy a PlayStation instead of buying a PC where I can experience most of the titles, or an Xbox where now I have my Game Pass and the ability to actually go on and play some of the titles that are also backwards compatible. That is now going to be one of the biggest differentiation factors. But I also don't think that PlayStation is going to be porting these games on the first or even the second year of their lifetime. I
Okay.
honestly think they're still going to be time exclusive on their platform for a long time before they get brought over. Only after a certain amount of time has passed is that they're going to start bringing these things over to PC.
Yeah, then it would just kind of be like, let's get as many sales as we can out of this game. Now that it's moved all the consoles, it's going to move.
Exactly. No, and also even but the thing is that makes PlayStation interesting is like, okay, they will sell the game at the normal cost, $60 $70 now, now that they're developing
Yeah.
for PlayStation 5, which is very expensive if you're trying to get this at launch or close to launch. But then they have the ability to put this on their PlayStation Plus to sell some more PlayStation Plus subscriptions there. That way, it's like, oh, you can get this game technically, quote unquote, free if you have access to our platform. And then they get a little bit more buy-in into their games. And then later on, it's like, okay, if you didn't get it in either of those two, let's charge them the $60 again, but on this other platform. The people that were hardcore and really wanted to play this game at the beginning, they can get them if you have a PlayStation platform. I don't think the hardcore fans are gonna necessarily not buy a PlayStation 5 anymore because the game is coming out on PC.
Yeah.
I think that's still gonna happen. They still wanna experience the game, and also if you one of the main factors that people buy consoles for is the accessibility of not having to deal with all the like the graphic settings and making sure that everything's on par. It's like, okay, the idea is just you put up the game and you play. That is becoming a little bit less of a factor
Less of a
nowadays.
guarantee. Yeah.
Yeah, because things are now having every single time that I log into my freaking PlayStation, I have to go. update, either I have a firmware update or I log into my game and the game has an update and I have to wait all the way back.
Or you
It's
bought
annoying.
Cyberpunk and it doesn't work like it
Yeah,
should on
that,
PlayStation
yeah,
or
that
Xbox.
that that can be a problem. Yeah, exactly. So I honestly think there's some you lose something on the PlayStation like that buying power, but you don't lose that much because they're not dumb. They're not. Horizon Zero Dawn came to PC like 3 years after it came to PlayStation. By that time, if you didn't play it on PlayStation, then you were not gonna play it. And this gives you a little bit more also marketability because now it's like, oh look, this game that we already made, that we already put the resources into, here you can have it now for other players can now experience it.
Yeah, and also just from like strictly speaking from a consumer perspective, I don't really
Yeah.
see any downside to this. It's kind of a pure plus for the consumer that now
Mm-hmm.
you're able to get this game in multiple forms. If you didn't have access to one, now it's open on another. So yeah, I mean, like if all the big three decided to do this, I wouldn't have any complaints.
Man, and the day that Nintendo decides to do it
Yeah,
is
the
the
day
day
that
that
Nintendo decides to put games on PC.
oh I mean personally that would make me extremely happy. It's not like I don't like my Switch. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
The Switch has enough buying power already because of its portability that it doesn't necessarily need the exclusive. It's just that Mario's only on Nintendo or Zelda and all of those favorite franchises. So, but if they made it to PC, oh, that would be such a great moment in gaming history. And I definitely think like if that then if games become less and less of a factor of which console you buy, then they really need to look at the console and decide like why is this box, this piece of hardware so special. Don't rely
yeah,
necessarily on the studios that you help develop because those are still yours and that revenue is still going to come to you, but more like okay, why is the hardware so special, which we already
yeah.
touched on.
And that I think that would breed like more innovation as well in that kind of console space, which
Yeah.
I think is a positive. Like obviously you have hits and misses when it comes to innovation, but I would say like without innovation we wouldn't have gotten the Switch. We would be on the GameCube 3 or whatever now instead. Um and I think that would be a shame. So yeah, more innovation as far as consoles go, I think is a positive.
Absolutely. And speaking of hardware upgrades,
Yeah.
PlayStation announced recently that it's actually working on a PlayStation virtual reality headset 2.0. Essentially, one specifically made for the PlayStation 5. They previously had one made for the PS4. It was sort of on the lower spec side compared to other headsets in the industry that required a big, heavy PC to actually run. Obviously, there have now been more hardware improvements on some of those headsets. And like I'm thinking of the Vive HTC or the Oculus. The Oculus even potentially was going to get the wireless version. So there's a few pieces of innovation there. It's just that now that they made the console upgrade to the PlayStation 5, they have more power and they now are looking into what kind of experiences and leaps in hardware power they can make for the PlayStation VR 2. And that brought up the topic, Matt, here that I have a question. Let me bring up my notes. What are your thoughts on the current state of like the virtual reality market right now? What are
Um
your like when you as a person you don't have a VR headset, right?
nope.
So when as an outsider to all of this, how do you see the virtual reality space within the gaming ecosystem?
Well, I have tried it. I do think VR is still a good ways off from being like commonplace. It still tends to be expensive. It still gives a lot of people motion sickness. And yeah, it still hasn't been widely adopted as well. I
Hmm.
think I touched on this briefly when we were going over games of the year, but I
Okay.
feel like the majority of the games coming out that are making strict use of VR, like being made for VR, are
Hmm.
kind of more at that tech demo-y level. Like obviously you got stuff like Beat Saber, which is a big deal, and games like that can work like games that are more like something like a rhythm game or a racing game or stuff more along those lines can work in this space. But as far as like big um, genre defining games, stuff like Half-Life Alyx, that's kind of the
Mm-hmm.
only one we have so far that it seems really made a splash as far as VR goes. And
Yeah.
I don't think VR is going away. I do think VR has a future.
Mm-hmm.
It's just going to be a slow burn, and I don't know if it'll ever fully, like, they've got some big road bumps to get over before it's like the standard for gaming. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure if that'll happen at all. Um, but I do look forward to seeing how that VR space develops because it is very interesting. And I
Yeah.
do think it's not going to go away at the very least because it's been a few years now and it is picking up steam slowly. So
Mm-hmm. I see what you did. I was gonna make a joke about Steam and Steam and VR games, but
yeah,
I'm just gonna leave it at that. In any case, I definitely agree with you. I really like. Obviously, at the beginning, we saw very small experiences within VR as we were experimenting with the technology, and there were a few games even on the PlayStation VR, the one for PlayStation 4, that were actually quite remarkable. The one that we're showing on the screen right now is Astro's Playroom. This is one of the ones I don't own a PlayStation VR headset. This is just one that I played on a friend's house, and this was actually pretty neat. Some of the things that they were able to do, but I think VR really strides when it's not trying to mirror what the current industry has as a standard for like AAA games or anything like that. When it's trying to do its own thing and experiment with its own medium, that's when it truly shines. But it has to be a polished experience. It cannot be, it's like, oh, it's neat that we can actually do this, but if it doesn't look good or it doesn't feel good, it obviously won't take off. I really like experimenting with those new ideas. I definitely think one of the things that I really want to try is that Half-Life Alyx.
yeah,
Obviously, that's one of the I guess game defining within that space,
yeah,
because I heard so many good things about it, and that's the first one that you think is like, okay, this is AAA quality virtual reality experience. Which in
right,
a lot of cases, that's not what we have gotten so far. Even when Resident Evil 7 came out on PlayStation VR, it still just felt it just didn't feel right. Even though it was the same experience that you had on the with controller, like no, just playing as we normally do, it wasn't necessarily. It didn't feel like its own experience. So I
right,
definitely think like experimenting and doing cute little tricks will allow us to see, it's like, okay, what works, what doesn't. Okay, now if we were to develop a game fully in VR and taking one of these big franchises within it, how would that work? How would we make it work? And definitely the hardware getting better is just gonna allow us to do even more and more things. So I definitely think VR has a future. Now, whether that future is going to be imminent and it's going to happen right away, I don't think so. I think what you said is more likely going to be more of a slow burn, but a slow burn that is going to be very worth it once these experiences make it to play. There's already a few ones out there, like Beat Saber is a huge one.
yeah,
That is a big example. Not necessarily the again a triple a single player experience. Is more like, okay, this rhythm style that works very well because it's no, you can only play
yeah.
this on VR.
It's kind of these like very focused experiences that
Mm-hmm.
just they only really do one thing, but they do it really well, and it's such like it's such a well thought out experience that you can kind of keep playing it. Like
Yeah.
we've seen similar things in rhythm games before with stuff like Guitar Hero. So, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, Beat Saber is kind of a worthy evolution of that, I would say. So
Yeah. I honestly think the VR was hurt by the fact that there was a lot of expectations when these VR headsets were coming out,
right,
especially from people building it up to be
like
the
this is
piece
going
of
to be the
hardware.
future. Yeah,
Exactly, that's gonna take over the industry, and obviously, that kind of mentality also hurt like the 3D televisions. Remember back in the day when those were gonna be a thing, and that kind of just died down. And then
yeah,
when people didn't see VR taking off as much, they were thinking it's like, oh, it's actually going to be another peripheral that nobody really plays and it doesn't
Yeah,
really
another
offer
motion
the
controls.
experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now, but now obviously there is potential here. There's a lot of companies still investing in them, thinking about what the future is. And now, given that even PlayStation, with the fact that PlayStation VR, the VR headset, I don't think it made that much of a splash. I don't know. Obviously, I don't know the numbers and how financial wise how well it took off. But I don't know anybody within the non-hardcore gaming space that owns a VR headset. Most of the people that I know that have a VR headset is because they're they're
Yeah.
very into the industry and are big fans of PlayStation. I don't know why I'm saying very so much. Sorry about that. But yeah, so we talked about whether this has a future, whether it's a current market. We don't know much about what the hardware specs of the next PlayStation VR is going to be like, but having it on a console definitely does help because it makes it a little bit more accessible than having to buy a VR ready PC. Although those are pre-built, and given the technology nowadays, that's becoming more and more available for people within even medium range graphics card. Before it used to be like only the high end stuff. You really had to build up a beefy PC to be able to play it. Now it's becoming a little bit more and more mainstream. But we'll see. I still again it's gonna be a slow burn.
Right.
Awesome. All right, so moving on from the PlayStation topics for a bit, let's talk about something that did get shut down. Anthem, a video game made by BioWare, essentially announced today that they were not going to continue development on or continuing their efforts of what they call Anthem Next, which brought the conversation and the questions in mind whether. What are your thoughts, Matt, on developing canceling projects with the excuse that they're going to focus on other projects?
Um, I think this is the kind of thing you sort of have to take as a case by case basis, because obviously something like a video game project can have a lot of different circumstances under which it's conceived. So in some cases, I think it's probably for the best if like a project isn't working out, maybe cut it loose and focus on other things.
Mm-hmm.
In this particular case, though, Anthem is a game that was sort of sold with a lot of promises about this is where the game is going to go eventually. Here's the roadmap of all this content that's coming in, and they didn't really deliver on that. And I guess this Anthem Next thing was sort of supposed to be the revitalizer to kind of try to give it some more life, and then maybe after that it could continue on if it had sort of the player base. But
Mm-hmm.
it obviously canceling that it does kind of suck for the people who invested in this thing,
Yeah.
thinking they were going to get more out of it than they did. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so there's kind of two sides to this. On the one hand, yes, if the publisher like isn't seeing the money in there, it makes sense that they wouldn't keep investing in something because it's not a good business decision. Um, I'm kind of the opinion it's a bit of a scummy move to sell games on premises like this in the first place, where it's kind of like, here's half a game and we'll finish the other half later. And I would kind of hope that people would wise up to stuff like that and maybe not be so quick to jump on that, because we did even see like another example not too long ago with that Avengers game, which seems
Yeah.
like it's going down a similar path now, where the game came out with all these promises, but people didn't like the half of a game they got, so now it doesn't seem like it's really in the studio's interest to keep pushing it and finishing that game, and that kind of sucks for the people who did get into it, thinking that it was going to be this big long thing with constant expansions and updates.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think it's a great look canceling something that was promised. Um, but I do understand why they would at this point. We did kind of talk before the podcast about Anthem. Sort of seemed like this kind of seemed inevitable. Anthem didn't necessarily seem to us like a game that the devs were really passionate about so much as something they were sort of forced to make, and some of the stories that have come out about it sort of corroborate that. So yeah, I feel bad for the players who were expecting something, but this didn't really come as a surprise to me.
Yeah, I mean, it was always in trouble development for a while,
Yeah,
and it's like you said, not only on the consumer side for people that invested into this game, but also the people that were brought into making this game and thinking that they were going to be bringing something really special. Because honestly, if you're in the gaming industry, you're trying to make you're doing it. Or at least for the most part, most people are doing it for out of passion. It's something
yeah,
that you really like wanted to get into, to bring out some of the things that you experience, and it form entertainment for the world that you wanted to actually push for. So when this sort of news that comes out, and then the game that you were working on so hard get canceled or anything like that, it kind of takes a toll on you. Uh, but it's also a toll on the people that really had high hopes for this, especially from a company not well known as Bioware, with titles such as Mass Effect and Dragon Age Inquisition, and Dragon Age, not necessarily the Inquisition. Those two franchises that have are very well known and very beloved. Well, in some titles, I would say some titles. I wouldn't put Andromeda in the beloved bucket right there. But
yeah,
now, when they obviously this situation is on a situation by situation basis. We also have what you mentioned about Marvel. Yeah, in a way, but I think Marvel was a bit different because Marvel at least offered this experience, the single story campaign, and then yes, they said that they were gonna build. It is gonna be like a game as a service, and they're gonna be content coming over and over to keep you engaged with the game. Obviously, that has been more of a slow burn. They only had a few more roundtables showing the two new characters, which I don't know if they play very similar, but it's Hawkeye and his daughter, Kate Bishop. So sort of in terms of somebody looking from the outside, it's like okay, very two bow wielding characters. They may play very differently. Obviously, I'm not sure because I actually haven't played the game myself. But yeah, it kind of sucks when you have those particular uh, promises, quote unquote promises that you are not able to fulfill. It's always like building up your audience, building up hype. It just hurts when that hype is just crushed. There's
yeah,
other examples, with the recent example of Cyberpunk 2077, that necessarily is not like it didn't even deliver you. There was just so many problems, so many different things that you just couldn't experience the game at its one. And I think it's a lesson on, and I definitely agree with you, Matt, that you need, for us to be weary when big publishers, even if they're very well-known publishers, make these promises that they're gonna deliver on this particular game structure, that you get very excited, because that's what we like to see as gamers. We want to see new worlds, and we want to get excited about really great things that are coming down the pipeline. But we gotta be weary because and think about what exactly is coming in it. I'm maybe be cautious and not get it day one. Even you have that fear of missing out. Just think about like, okay, let's see how the game goes, see how they what they actually deliver, and if there's people, and if the hype turns out to be true, then it's like okay, maybe jump in and start getting around in there.
yeah.
Um, one other question that was brought up with this story. By the way, if you don't know all the stories that we're talking about, instead of we're shifting around, instead of just reading them, they're all gonna be in the show notes. So if you are listening to this on any podcast services, just look at the description, and in the description of the YouTube, they will be all in there if you want to read what is happening with all these different stories. But one other question that came about from this was how much information should developers basically share with their communities nowadays? As games get developed, it seems like the developers are trying to show more and more of their development process and why some of the reasons, or quote unquote, or pretend that what are some of the reasons why things get delayed or canceled or anything like that. In this particular case for Anthem, one of the excuses was that the pandemic took a toll on the productivity of the team, and that's why they were not able to deliver on their promises for Anthem Next internally, and they decided to shift their focus to work on their existing games that they, for example, Dragon Age 4 and potentially whatever Mass Effect is coming down the pipeline, which we only saw a very small glimpse of it in one of the conferences
Yeah.
last year. So what do you think, man? How much information should they share?
Um, I think transparency is really good, honestly. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've said one of my favorite things that Nintendo did in these past few years was when they put out that video about Metroid Prime 4 that basically said up front, like, yeah, development was not going um the way we wanted, and we really weren't satisfied with what was coming out. But we're repivoting. We're starting development over from the ground up. Retro Studio sent like a demo that we thought really had a lot of potential. So now we're letting them handle it entirely. And yeah, basically just letting us know exactly what was happening with a title that a lot of people wanted to know about, even if that news was obviously not going to be favorable for a lot of them. This idea that development was basically starting over. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think transparency is really good. Another thing I've mentioned, kind of praised before, was the one team within Square Enix that does the Bravely games. I really like how they've taken this approach of putting out demos that ask for
Yeah.
feedback, and then they even will like put out a video specifically mentioning the feedback they got and the things they've changed because of it. I think that's great. It's something like more that you would expect more out of like an indie studio. So it's really cool to see a big guy like Square Enix really taking consumer feedback to heart. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's 100% positive.
I
Like
think
there might be sorry, there might be some
mhm.
people who get unreasonably upset finding out certain things. Like I'm sure there were people who were mad that Metroid was starting over development, but I feel like you can't base your decisions on like making a few people upset
Yeah.
when overall what you're doing is a good thing. Like if the game is getting delayed regardless, I would rather you let people know why.
Hmm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, when it comes to delays, is a bit if I find it that is a slippery slope. Just because people get upset over delays sometimes, because obviously you're expecting the game to come out soon and you're excited to get your hands on it, and that kind of just gets shifted over. But at the same time, we gotta remember what happened with things when things get rushed and we don't actually get the experience that we did that we expected. So it's obviously I'm me personally, I'm all for delays. Take the
yeah,
time to make sure that we get a good experience rather than rush something. That that obviously there's a lot more different factors than just like, oh, just take your time. So money involved and managing and everything like that. But I don't get into that side of things. The other one of my thoughts were like, okay, yeah, obviously I really like transparency when it comes to consumers because that allows us to understand why certain decisions were made, and I think that that helps the community understand when things need to be shifted over, or instead of us getting to the experience and finding out that it's completely different from what we thought it was going to be. Now, that being said, I do feel like there is this sense of too much information because a lot of the times when you're sharing news about your project, depending on which stage of the project you're at, if you're announcing things too early and you're starting to talk about features, features may change. Like things may
yeah,
change. Things happen. You're trying something and it doesn't really work. So the moment that you say, "Oh, if you start highlighting like features and promises that you're gonna be delivered on, and then all of a sudden your community gets very excited because it's like, oh, we're gonna be able, in the case of Anthem, we're gonna be able to fly everywhere and do all this sort of stuff. It's like now the development team is kind of on a corner because they say the community is very excited about this feature and that sort of stuff, but it doesn't kind of blend in well with the world. So now what do? We actually have to push forward because that we already said that we were going to do this.
yeah.
I definitely
And I
think
think
that. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think a good example of that sort of happening that I've heard referenced a few times is Peter Molyneux when it comes to Fable, or when it came to Fable
Hmm.
back in the good old days. Would kind of get up on a stage and get like too excited and talk about a lot of features that weren't even planned for the game just because
Hmm.
he he would have an idea and he would think, "Oh, that's great. I want to put that in the game. I'm gonna just like say it without consulting anyone else."
Yeah.
And yeah, so Fable was kind of a game of broken promises as a result of that, and kind of like that unchecked ambition. So I guess if I could amend my thing, I would just say like if you're being honest and you're being like open and you're not like saying something is definitively there when it's
Mhm.
could change, like yeah, it makes sense to maybe not reveal things as fact that are still sort of on the drawing board. But
Yeah.
yeah, I
I
think
think
there's a right way to do it, but generally, yeah, being transparent, I would still say is good for me. Anyway, sorry.
no, no, that's totally fine. I like the way that you say things. It also depends on the scale of the game. When it's a big scale title, it makes it's a lot harder to shift. But I like
Yeah,
how some of the indie games make this. I was watching but not necessarily a documentary, but a video series of how like Subnautica was made and how they
yeah,
were so transparent with their community, and they say we're gonna try this stuff. We tried it and it didn't work, or they release some. I like the way that, for example, things that are in early access kind of work because you have the expectation that the game is not fully done, and you can start showing things to the people and get early feedback on the players. Because a lot of the times when you're making a game, not necessarily you have it's like okay we think this is actually going to be fun, but once you try it or you give it to your players, or players are like actually not necessarily that fun, we're actually more looking forward to this particular part of the game. So those kind of
right.
shifts actually uh, work really well, and I like that transparency. But obviously indie games can actually do that, while triple more high scale games are harder to maintain that constant communication. And that's when, but I definitely think that we're moving into a more transparent world, a world where even the players themselves want to be involved into what's happening inside the behind the curtain, and seeing like okay how is the game shaping out, what are some of the things that are getting what are some of the decisions that are being made on this experience that I'm very excited, I'm very much looking forward to.
All right.
All right. Okay, so with that out of the way, the serious conversations out of the way, Matt, let's talk about the highlights from the Nintendo Direct last week. So we obviously did this live together. We watched the Nintendo Direct, a non-live reaction. We actually had to record it because it was during working hours. So anyway, without the rigmarole, what was your major highlight from the Nintendo Direct?
Triangle strategy,
Okay, okay. Well, build
which I
up on
hope
it.
they change. I
Tell me
hope
a
they
bit more.
change the name. I hope they change the name so I can call it something cooler. I can't hear you anymore.
Oh my, sorry, muted. Obviously, when you're doing producing and doing hosting at the same time, doesn't necessarily work all the time. But in any case, what I was asking was, what are why triangle strategy? Like out of
Yep.
everything that you saw, the new Smash character, Mario Golf, which by the
Yeah.
way should be your highlight, the new Splatoon and everything like that. Why triangle strategy?
Um. Well, you know that I loved me some Octopath. So just coming out of that developer is already a big plus for me. The fact that it came completely like I wasn't expecting it at all because I know that team also does Bravely Default, and we have a Bravely Default game coming out pretty soon here, actually, like in 2 days. So yeah, I was not expecting another game in the vein of Octopath, at least visually. Um, anytime soon. Like I wasn't expecting anything out of that developer soon. So yeah, that was the surprise of it. The fact that it's a pseudo sequel to a game I like, even if it really doesn't have much to do with it apart from the developer and the general aesthetic. Um, and I guess I don't want to like bash on everything else that was shown, but like Splatoon, I'm excited for, but it didn't really show me enough to get me like hyped. Like it didn't really show what's why is this a Splatoon 3? Like what's the big reason that this couldn't just be DLC for 2?
Mhm, okay.
And Mario Golf did look a lot better than I was expecting. That one was kind of fighting an uphill battle just because I don't care about golf at all. So the fact that it was still a highlight for me, I think speaks volumes of how good that looked. And Smash, well, anyway, what was your highlight of the direct?
I mean, by far, but mine was Mario Golf. I am a
Yeah,
very big fan of the Mario sports games. Although Mario Golf is the only one that I haven't actually tried before. I know
gotcha.
there's been like two previous titles on it. It's just that golf and me just don't resonate. It's nothing that really interests me about it,
Yeah,
and it's not to like bash or anything. It's just there was no interest in it,
yeah, it
and
just doesn't appeal to us.
yeah, and I haven't tried it. To be fair, I haven't even given it a shot. I don't even know the rules. It's just when I look at normal golf, it just doesn't seem it doesn't seem like my cup of tea. That being said, though, I do enjoy myself. So like I mentioned before, the live stream even began. Like Mario Strikers was my sweetheart. That's the one that I really wanted to see again. Mario
Yep.
Sluggers, the baseball game, was also a game that that I played for a long time with my brother. So it has a very special place in my heart. But the fact that we're getting Mario Golf, and now that I haven't gotten a Mario Sports ever since Mario Tennis Aces, which I played for, I don't know, 500 hours or so, then it's one that I'm like, okay, I'm more excited to see what kind of what I can get out of it, especially with that speed mode. That is
Yeah,
what,
the speed golf was when I started getting interested. Uh,
yes, because it starts giving the Mario spiciness to it, right? It's not just gonna
yeah,
be another mini golf kind of style game. There's gonna be something on top of it that Mario. It's not necessarily like Mario Sports spice, but more like the Mario Party kind of style that you want to see. Why do I play this cartoony looking golf game rather than whatever Tiger Woods PGA Tour 2020 or whatever the new golf games are? So that's why I'm super excited, especially on those outfits for the new characters. I don't know what it is, but seeing Mario characters on sports outfits, it blows my mind. It's freaking awesome. I love it.
because they spent
Wario,
so long where they would just wear their normal clothes in all the sports games.
yeah, it's great. It's great. I'm very much looking
Yeah,
forward
and
to it.
you didn't even mention the story mode looks pretty
Mm,
interesting relative to the tennis one. Like
yeah,
they used to make all these Mario Sports RPGs for the handheld systems,
yeah,
and it was unclear if Aces was going to go that direction. It kind of came out and it wasn't really like there were stats, but you didn't really have much control over them. The leveling
yeah,
up didn't feel like it really meant much. So this one already looks a lot more promising. There's like a whole town you can run around. You're explicitly building up like a me character instead of just Mario, so presumably that means there's a bit more you have a bit more like customization over how you decide to build them,
yeah,
which I think is interesting. And yeah, so that also looks a lot a lot better.
yeah. It's just even when Mario Tennis. If we're comparing it to Mario Tennis Aces, obviously the single player mode didn't do much, like in my opinion.
Yeah.
I didn't even get to play the single player mode until way late into the game. I was mostly focused on the experience of playing with friends and playing online because surprisingly enough, it was one of the few games that kind of works online, sort of, for the most part. We'll say golf. I don't think you need to be. The online needs to be top notch because it's
Well,
golf. You
now
can
it
take
does because
turns.
we got speed mode now.
Except for the speed mode, I'm worried about the speed mode. Hopefully, it actually works well because you have in Mario Tennis you usually have 1v1. Then they introduce the 2v2, so you technically have four players. But in golf, if you're doing speed, you're gonna have more characters than just the two, right?
Yeah, it's four. It seems like.
Yeah. I'm also looking forward to see what kind of competitive scene comes out of it because for some reason we
Do you
decide
think
to
it's
make
as crazy as the tennis one? Yeah.
I don't think so. I personally don't think it's gonna be as competitive as the tennis one was,
I
or
don't
as
know.
competitive
Might
as
be
we made it
surprised.
seem. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'll be surprised. I didn't think there was gonna be much of a scene there, but there still there obviously was, and one of the best communities out there for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was my highlight. As far as anything else, all the announcements goes, I I love the Sykes that we got for Zelda. Like we
Oh
got the
yeah.
creators showing up. It's like, actually, yeah, we're not getting any news on the next Breath of the Wild. We know that you want some news, but yeah, you're not getting any. Here's Skyward Sword. Have fun.
Yeah,
And I'm
and
like, okay,
Skyward Sword has button controls as well, so that's the big news in regards to that game.
exactly. And then the triangle strategy. I didn't finish Octopath, not because I didn't think it was. I thought it was a bad game or anything. It's just it kind of fell with me playing other things. I think I'm trying to remember why exactly I started playing it because I really thought I was really enjoying the story and what it had to offer in terms of
Yeah, there's just a
turn-based
lot of
combat.
games.
Yeah. So the triangle strategy seems interesting. I'll definitely. Well, by the way, if you're hearing this, check out. We're gonna be doing a little bit of a discussion because there is actually a triangle strategy demo that you should check out right now on the Nintendo Store. Matt played it, so he's gonna give us his thoughts on the matter on a separate video. So keep an eye out for that on the podcast services and on the YouTube as well.
All
But
right.
I think
So
that's everything.
the big ender.
Oh,
Well, I
okay.
was just
Yeah,
gonna say
yeah,
the
yeah,
big
yeah, yeah.
ender was Splatoon. I
Mm-hmm.
know. I don't know if you've played Splatoon. Have you?
I have. I didn't play the second one. I didn't play the one on the Switch. I played it on the Wii
Okay.
U.
Yeah, it's the same for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought like the bit at the start had me really intrigued where they're in the desert, but then that just kind of ends and they go back to sort of normal Splatoon, which is like, I mean, normal Splatoon's fine, but I want to know like what's the big deal here? Like what's new in Splatoon 3? So I thought that
Yeah,
was I'm intrigued to see like if there is something more interesting going on there, but they didn't really capture my attention with this trailer.
fair. I mean, at the beginning it seemed weird. Like you said that you mentioned the desert area. It
Yeah.
looked like they were going a different direction. It kind of to me it hints at a single player mode that they're gonna
Yeah,
have
and
out
you get
there.
your like little buddy as well. They call him
Yeah,
the little like, is it a salmon? Maybe I don't know. I
yeah,
didn't play
it's
the
a
second one.
fish, but it's, they literally call him Buddy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that is definitely something's up. Like I don't think it's just gonna be the multiplayer mode anymore. I think there's gonna be some single player, but honestly, we don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
In terms of what differentiation from Splatoon 2, we'll have to see. It's also interesting to me that they decided to go with Splatoon 3 so soon, I think. Just
Well,
because
you
Splatoon
say
2, 2017.
yeah, but I mean, we were also like, first of all, Splatoon 3 isn't coming out till next year. Like this was an early
Right,
reveal.
right.
So it's still a ways off. But I mean, if you think if Breath of the Wild 2 is coming next year as well, or even late this year, that's
Mm-hmm.
about the same level of gap. Like
True, like
we
Splatoon 2
you
was
don't
a very
realize
early on.
how long. Yeah, you don't realize. Yeah, Splatoon 2 was also in that first year. It still feels like the Switch is a new thing, but it's really not. It's been a few years now
Uh, that's
since
true.
what was it, 2016 it first came out, or
I think it's
2017?
2017. Yeah, when Zelda came
2017,
out.
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it'll be, even if Splatoon, so even if Splatoon 3 comes out like really early next year, that's still what, 4.5, 5 years about between 2 and 3?
Okay, fair. I was just thinking like compared to the other franchises, I'm thinking like
Yeah,
Metroid Prime.
usually Nintendo is like one game per console for their major franchises.
Hmm. There's a few
But I
exceptions,
guess
obviously, but I'm thinking
yeah.
like, why did they decide to do that instead of Mario Kart, for example? Not necessarily because it's not like their same studio is working on the same games. That's obviously separate studios.
Right.
Uh, but I'm just wondering like why the focus on Splatoon rather
I
than
think
something like.
they really have a lot of confidence in Splatoon. Like I was sort of going over this the other day with some friends talking about like how big is Splatoon really?
Mhm.
And the little digging I did, I found out it seems like with only 2 games, Splatoon's lifetime sales is already basically on par with the entire Metroid series.
Oh, okay.
Like this it seems like it's gonna be their next Animal Crossing, like their next sort of big new IP that ends up being this massive sales juggernaut for them. So I can
Fair.
understand them really wanting, and like Splatoon 2 was some people also kind of thought that was just like kind of like their way of getting Splatoon 1 onto Switch.
Mm.
Like it didn't feel like it. was doing a whole lot new necessarily, but people sort of accepted it because um, Wii U was obviously not the most popular console, and they wanted Splatoon on Switch quick. So in some ways, this might be kind of like the true Splatoon sequel. Like this is the chance they have to really push it forward and show like what direction this series is going to go in. So I'm definitely interested to see what comes out of this.
Yeah, it is interesting, but like you said, it's just that I haven't played Splatoon since the Wii U. It might be good to jump back and see. I know a friend of ours and friend of the show is so that like a really good player of Splatoon 2. So I know that I'm at least gonna be watching him destroy some squids in that game. Awesome. Okay, so I think that wraps it up for this episode. Thanks everybody who joined us today. Remember, if you're hearing this on any podcast service around the globe and you want to see what our faces looks like and Matt's never-ending smile, you can watch us up on YouTube by searching Chat and Games or by looking at the show description. But remember, this podcast comes out to you on all podcast services, including Spotify now. We are also the video is on for YouTube, and any we also want to hear your thoughts. That's one of the main things. This is a conversation. We are all obviously just voicing our opinions on different subjects and different questions. We also want to hear back from you to see what are your thoughts on some of the questions that we brought up in this episode. So make sure to reach out at us by writing some comments in the YouTube section if you're watching this on the video, or just by joining the Discord and having a chat with us. If you're really old school though, you can reach us out at itsallfunandgamescb@gmail.com. I remember this is a gaming topic, talk show conversation. So we'll come to you live. Well, not necessarily live, but we'll come to you again next week with a new series of topics to discuss. In the meantime, hope you have a great rest of your week. And Matt, any final thoughts?
Bye.
This is Chat and Games signing off.